Hi, I'm Eric Lambert, and welcome back to How to Clinical Research. So today's call comes from London, and this is Jeremiah. He's very experienced in clinical research. He works obviously in London, but on the educational side of clinical research. And he wants to get into the more industry level sponsored research. Either way, though, reading his resume, he seems very skilled, very knowledgeable, and will make a great candidate for a lot of companies. So let's get him on the call and let's see what he has to ask. I think that's great. I think that you're well positioned, and I think that most companies would love to have you. So tell me a little bit about your background, how you got into research, and what you've been doing so far.
I'm a biology graduate, and then I started working for a clinical research site, which did imaging, and I worked there for a year, and then I moved to a larger CRO, where I was an outsourced employee working as a clinical trial assistant kind of coordinator role. And I was outsourced to a pharmaceutical sponsor. So I did that for a while, and then currently I'm working as a clinical trial monitor on IMP studies, or studies with clinical trial drugs, for an academic university in the UK.
Okay. Now, your experience is kind of interesting to me because I see that you are, obviously, like you said, currently a monitor, but for investigator-initiated projects at a university. So typically, my experience with investigator-initiated trials is usually where the doctor will have an idea of how to use a product of, let's say, a pharmaceutical company. And then they'll contact that pharmaceutical company to then start an investigator-initiated trial. Now, usually, the monitors for those trials will be provided by the sponsor of whatever drug is involved with that. So even though it's investigator initiated, there's still usually a sponsor involved that's providing the drug and maybe the monitors. So on your end though, you're the monitor coming from the university, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
The university acts as the sponsor for the trials.
Gotcha, and they're hiring the monitors. Okay, that's interesting. That's an interesting setup. Now the physicians that are starting these trials, they're currently employed by the university?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
The doctors working with the medical schools.
Okay, and then you're doing drug trials primarily, right? Have you done any device trials?
No, I've not done a device trial to date.
Okay, but you want to stay on the pharmaceutical side, correct?
Yeah,
okay.
I'd like to get a lot more experience with drug trials.
Okay, and then you essentially are just trying to you're calling it commercial versus non-commercial. What I call that is just academic versus industry, but it's the same thing. So you want to get into more of like the industry-sponsored research, right, away from academia.
Yeah, because I was previously working for a CRO as an outsourced employee to a pharmaceutical company, and I prefer how
I saw that.
Operates. Yeah.
Yeah, so working at PPD prior is great. And you were already working on behalf of a sponsor. So that's fantastic experience. That positions you very well. And what did you do there? You weren't a monitor, right?
No, I was supporting the setup and maintenance of the studies in-house with supporting the clinical trial managers for that one, and then also helping to consolidate the TMF and clinical trial management system as well.
Gotcha. Okay. So more like a clinical trial assistant or a clinical study assistant for those.
Yeah.
For PPD. Okay.
Yeah, exactly that.
So that that's fantastic. So you have the CSA experience on a CRO side and a very large, like the largest CRO, PPD. And then you now are working as a monitor, having the monitor experience, but on the academia side, but still very relevant experience because it's in pharmaceutical drugs and you're conducting it as if it were kind of an industry-sponsored trial, even though it's all done through the university. So I think you're positioned very well as you know, I always view people or anything as a product, right? And you would position a product for marketing, right? And right now you're positioning yourself to get hired at a on the sponsor level for a sponsor or for a industry sponsored trial. So I think you're positioned nicely. I think you have the right experience. You have the CRO experience along with the sponsor experience, being contracted through a sponsor for that job, and then still conducting currently sponsor related activities as a monitor. So I think you're not going to have a problem at all in getting a job with the sponsor. I think that you have everything that they're looking for, and it might be more about just how you present yourself to them.
I'm really hoping that I can make the crossover. So just trying to prepare for the interviews.
Right. Now you have an interview coming up, correct?
Yeah, it will be the week after next.
Week after next. Okay, and then this is with the CRO?
Yeah, with CROs.
Two CROs. Okay, perfect. Now, are you wanting to stay on the CRO side, or do you want to work directly with a sponsor?
When I was in my previous role, and I wanted to become a monitor, all of the people that I worked with said that CRO, in the beginning, is the best place to work because you learn a lot quite fast. Mm-hmm. So I think, at least in the beginning, I'd like to stay in the CRO side and then eventually move over to working directly for the sponsor. Okay.
Now, I think there's some definitely pros and cons to it, and I think what you mentioned right there is a good pro. Now, what I always tell people to keep in mind when they're working for CROs, which you might already have a good understanding of this since you've already worked at PPD, but just that the CROs, they really work their employees pretty hard because they are all about billable hours. So that is probably why they say that you will learn a lot quickly, because it's such a high pace, right? At the sponsor level, it's not so much critical like that. It's a lot more relaxed, laid back, because you're not worried about billable hours. You're worried about the quality of work and worried about ensuring that your sites are doing everything in accordance to FDA regulations and sponsor procedures, right? So it's a little bit different in how they're viewed as a CRO or as a sponsor in terms of what they are focusing on. So I would just be mindful of that. If you don't mind working, at a fast pace and long hours and maybe a lot of overtime, then a CRO would be okay. But I think you're positioned very nicely to go straight into the sponsor world. I think you have all the proper experience. Going to the CRO, I wouldn't consider that as a starting point for you because you've already done it, and you're currently doing monitor duties. So it might be I would recommend maybe going straight to the sponsor.
Oh, I didn't think I would be able to do that.
Yeah.
That's nice to hear. I've seen a few sponsor roles, but I wasn't sure if I would even get my CV would be looked at.
Yeah. So I forgot where I saw this quote, but it's good for the viewers as well. People many times before they can even succeed, many times they count themselves out, right? So without going through the process and seeing if it actually works, many people just say, it won't happen, right? And you never really know, right? It's worth a shot at least. And I, reviewing your resume, I think you're positioned very well for the sponsor. I think a lot of sponsors would hire you. You have the right experience, you have the right background, you have all the right things listed on your resume, you have all the keywords, you have a diverse portfolio in terms of the different types of trials you've worked in. I think it shows a very well-rounded, experienced researcher, in my opinion. Yeah. So, I don't know what sponsors are near you in London, but I imagine there's quite a bit in the European area. I would say just start applying to see what's local. Is like GSK or BMS local to you?
they're my two closest ones, I think.
Okay. So yeah, I would apply to those companies. I think you would make a good fit for them. Would you be going for the monitor role, or what role are you trying to get to?
Monitor role, just so that I can cement all of my knowledge before hopefully progressing to study management one day.
Okay. So at the sponsor level, you have essentially two types of CRAs. One is the monitor, which travels out to the sites to do source data verification, as you're aware. And then the other CRA is the in-house team. So the in-house CRAs will work primarily at the headquarters and do all the administrative work remotely for the sites. The in-house CRA many times will overlap with the monitor. It just depends how the company utilizes the CRA. But just keep that in mind, because that's maybe a good question you can ask when you're applying. If you apply to an in-house CRA role, if that CRA is also acting as a monitor or would be working with the monitors more closely and visiting the sites, or are they just purely working in the office? And that way you can kind of gauge which position would better suit you for the experience that you're looking for. Now, to get to a manager, there's a couple different roles you can get to. There's project manager, and then there's a clinical trial manager. It's called a CTM. Not every sponsor will have a CTM. It just depends how they structure their teams. But the CTM role and the project manager role would probably be the two that you would be aiming for. And you can get to both of those by being an in-house CRA or by being a monitor. You just have to essentially show that you know what you're doing, which of course you do, I think, based on your resume here, and show that you can work independently without having to have someone look over you, essentially. If you could show that you are self-efficient, self-reliant, you know when to reach out to others for help, and that you're not just siloed and you're a good team member and you have a good understanding of the study, good understanding of FDA regulations, good understanding of the sponsors' SOPs and their values of what they're looking for. If you can show all of that and have a high work ethic and good results for your sites by getting everyone up and activated on time, enrolling, meeting your enrollment goals, and just really acting independent, that sets you up to be a good candidate to be promoted to a project manager eventually. Now, sometimes they'll put you through your paces, like, oh, you got to be CRA 1, CRA 2, CRA 3. That to me is kind of a waste. I wouldn't try to go through those rankings like that. I would try to position yourself and make the point that you want to become a project manager early on, so that they already have that in mind, and maybe you can kind of leap ahead once they're ready to promote you. And if not, if they don't want to do that, you could go through those steps of climbing the ladder, but it just takes a little bit longer than I think is necessary. If that's the case, you can then change into a new company that would hire you directly as a project manager. So that's what I would do. You don't want to work at a place too long. Like, let's say you work there 2 years and you're not being promoted, or they're putting you through this promotion that's going to take forever to get to management. Then I would start considering, trying to look at other companies that would take you on as a manager.
Okay, I didn't realize that you didn't have to climb all the...
Yes, sometimes jumping companies allows you to skip a couple steps. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so don't spend 5 years doing the same job. I'm sure you could do it a lot sooner than that. Because CRA 1, CRA 2, CRA 3, they're all essentially the same. They're just going to have different pay associated to it, maybe different levels of trust that they have for you. But it doesn't really do much for advancing your career. The job function is going to be the same. The responsibilities will overall be the same amongst all three of those roles. So if I were you, I would try to make that jump. Maybe after working with them for a couple of years, you can see if they'll hire you as a project manager or look for a new company.
Excellent. Yeah, that's what I hope to do anyway.
Yeah. Any other questions? Any other concerns? I know you're like I said, very well experienced, so I am not expecting to school you on anything.
I'm happy to be schooled. What I'm really wanting to know is, within industry,
Yeah, so they are looking for someone that understands how things work, and some sponsors will do a lot of training, like they'll train you how to do the job essentially, even though they want you to be experienced in it. But other companies won't train you at all about how to do the job. They'll just train you on how to work there at their company, like, how to use these systems, who to talk to for what, the processes that they do. But they won't necessarily train you on the job. So every company is a little bit different. Some people are looking for really kind of veterans and that know everything essentially. And other people are looking for experienced people that, they also don't mind training, right? So the expectations that they have of you will vary a little bit from company to company. But overall, they want to know that they want to have confidence in you, right? They want to see that you actually know what you're talking about, that you know the industry, that you know their company. So before every interview, you have to look up the company, look up any sort of press releases that they have, any recent news, like FDA approvals or maybe new studies that they started, etc. And then look at products that they make, any devices or drugs that they're making. See what they're for, what indications they work in, and who their competitors are, how they match up to their competitors. That way, when you go to these interviews, you understand their playing field, and when you start talking to them about these things, they're going to have an appreciation for you because now they see that you took the time to look them up, to learn about them, to understand what they do, and it makes them feel more comfortable with you. Now, another big part of it is they might ask you scenario type questions. So one question I was asked before was, tell me your process, walk me through your process of a PSV, right? And so I had to tell them essentially everything that I would do in a short, context of the steps that are required to conduct a PSV, right? But they also have asked me, pretend they gave me like a piece of paper. Pretend this is a physician's CV. What would you look for, right? So like the answer to that question was, aside from you have to understand that each protocol is different, right? Each protocol has different needs. So when you're looking at a CV, you have to look in context of that study's requirements. So for instance, you're going to want to look up their education, make sure that they have the proper medical background to be a PI essentially of that particular study. You would have to look at their prior clinical trial experience. Are they an experienced investigator? Are they new? You'd have to look at also what facilities they work in. What hospitals are they affiliated with? Because that tells you the resources that they have available to them, and if those resources match the requirements of the sponsor, right? Of that particular study. So, for instance, if they require fluoroscopy and they are not affiliated with any sort of center that has a high-tech imaging center, then you would know that they're not a good fit, right? And so that's essentially how I answered that question, and that tells them that you know what you're talking about. That gives them confidence in you, and that's essentially what you're trying to instill during these interviews with sponsors.
I'm really gonna brush up on my scenario questions and just make sure that I really put forward that I know what I'm doing when I'm at site.
Exactly. Because that's what they're looking for a lot. And like I mentioned before, in one of my past calls too, there's this thing called persuasion, and what that means is you're trying to set up the conversation to go down a certain path for you, to set you up for success, right? So one of the good things to ask when you meet the hiring manager in the very beginning is just to ask, what was it about you that they liked that caused them to bring you in for the interview? And what that's going to do is it's going to set them up to think about all the positive things about you, right? And when they start saying those positive things, you can then elaborate on those things and just carry the conversation down that positive path. And many times, that's going to help them just see you in that light without focusing on maybe things that you might not know. And it might deter them from maybe asking you some tricky questions because maybe they're skeptical about your experience. It'll just keep it positive, and that's a good way to do it. And, at the end of that conversation, you can talk about how your past experience working at PPD on the CRO side, working directly with the sponsor in that fashion, and then working on the academic side, but still as a monitor, still conducting drug trials that are very structured very much like the industry, have set you up with the right experience and gives you the proper package to work at these companies now. And when you say it like that, they're really going to be in line to agree with you, because now you've already walked them through a path of what they liked about you, and now you're kind of tying it all together for them, showing why you're a good fit, and at that point they should agree with you. And that's a good way to kind of structure those conversations.
Yeah, I'll definitely use that when I go into my interviews next week.
Yeah, it's a useful little tool.
And another question I had was, I know you said that you work within medical devices trials.
Correct.
So what are the main differences between drug trials and medical devices? Because I've never been exposed to medical device trials.
Yeah, so medical device, the Code of Federal Regulations are, there's some specific for pharmaceutical trials and some specific for medical device trials, just because they're talking about different things, right? So you have some differences in the Code of Federal Regulations that you're following, but you also have some differences in terms of, like in the pharmacy world, you have a reg binder and a pharmacy binder. In the device world, you have just usually a reg binder. And then you're going to, right. And then instead of investigational brochures, like you have in pharmaceutical trials, you have a thing called an IFU, which are instructions for use. And that's teaching you how to use the device. But it also provides the scientific background, just like the investigational brochure does. So it would provide, the background for, the scientific background that was used to develop this device or this drug, right? So those are essentially the major differences. There's no 1572 in biotech. Yeah, because again, it's a little different. It's structured a little bit different with the Code of Federal Regulations. But you have essentially just the investigator's agreement and the protocol signature page, but no IFU, no 1572. Right. But really, everything is very similar. Aside from those things, you just have some different lingo that you have to learn. Like they call, like, rather than, because there's essentially everything is based off of the procedure date, right? The procedure of implanting a device. So you call those cases. So there's just some different lingo that's involved. But other than that, it's really similar to pharmaceutical. The sponsors do act a little bit differently, though. Like in pharmaceutical, they're very stringent on the rules in terms of what they expect a site to do. Like it's very structured, right? Like you always are gonna. I have to think about some certain examples, but you're always going to single line through initial and date, and you're always going to have a DOA log, and you're always going to have a training log and an enrollment log. And the biotech world is a little bit different. They kind of do things their own way. Like each company, they might structure the documents differently. They may not have necessarily a DOA log, but just a training log per person, rather than having it all on one list. It's just a little bit different in terms of how they structure, because it's not so stringent like pharmaceutical world is.
Slightly more relaxed.
Yeah, a little bit more relaxed in how they do things. It's not so like this is the way to do it and that's the only way to do it kind of thing. They're more like, okay, this is how I think we should do it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I've never really come across them, but it's one I think I might be interested in working with.
Yeah, it's a good, it's a good way to, like, for instance, if you're working at a CRO, you might end up doing monitoring for a medical device company. So that might be a good way to go if you're trying to get into medical devices, because then you can gain experience through that way.
Oh yeah, that's good.
Yeah, because you can, if you go in as into a CRO, for, let's say, a drug trial, you can tell them at the during the interview that you're also interested in medical devices, and if that would be a possibility for them to add you on a study like that in the future. And I'm sure they would be able to do something like that for you. And that would be a good way to gain experience, and then maybe go into the biotech world for on the sponsor level. But you could also still go straight into biotech. You just be a little bit harder of a sell since you don't have that prior experience. But I think if you show them that you're aware of some of the differences, they would be able to, take you seriously and at least interview you.
Okay, yeah. I think that would be good.
Yeah.
And my other question was, with regards to different therapy areas, obviously you'll be trained on the protocol to work on the study, but what are other good ways of getting more up to date with understanding more about the therapy area that you're working in?
So what I've been able to do, fortunately for myself, I've had a lot of direct access to physicians that I've worked with. And many of them, just early on in my career, were able to sit down with me and really break down the indications, understand the diseases, and instill in me why these trials are important. Why is it that they're conducting these trials, and where did it stem from? And a lot of them were able to kind of give me that knowledge just early on in my career, which was super helpful because it was coming straight from a doctor, right? So if you have access to a doctor, I would suggest speaking with them to get some of that understanding. Because a lot of them are really happy to teach and are happy, they like when people ask questions. It just depends on the doctor. That some doctors don't want to be bothered, right? So everyone's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But some doctors are really into the education side, and if you know anyone like that, I would suggest to reach out to them, and they can be a great source for getting that deeper understanding as to why this drug is being studied, why this is important for this patient population, right? So that's what I was able to get a lot in my career, and I would recommend doing that. Now, what I did for the devices was a little bit different because I didn't really have direct access with doctors who worked with those devices. So I just did a lot of research online. I would look them up, understand the indication a little bit better just by doing some reading online. And then I'll look up videos on how they do the procedures to understand essentially what was involved with implanting these devices. And that helped me a lot during conversation during the interviews with these companies. Because I was able to at least have a visual aid in my head and be able to communicate, at least on a basic level, what was conducted. And then that was enough, of course, to get me in the door and to get me hired. And then, while you're on the job, you're hopefully given more direct experience with those devices or, with the doctors so that you can kind of get a deeper understanding of what's going on. And that's been the case for me. But like I said, every company is a little bit different. So, they might use their staff members more broadly, or they might use them more narrowly in terms of their responsibilities. And that might be a good question to ask as well during these interviews is although there's the job description, ask them in real life day-to-day practice, is this all I would be doing, or would you be collaborating with other team members and getting some more experience that way? Because of course, the more experience you have, the better for you, right? And managers know this, and they'll know if they are able to offer you something more or not, and that might even be something that might make the hiring manager a little bit nervous, because if they really like you, they don't want to say something that would deter you, right? So that might be a good way for them to even just be like, okay, I need to make some exceptions for this guy because I do want him. So let's give him some more experience as we go, right?
Yeah, I'll be sure to ask that when I go next week.
Mm-hmm.
A random one, but
yeah.
For CRA, what is the best car to drive to get around?
For a CRA?
Yeah.
Many times you're flying, so the car doesn't really matter. It just depends where their sites are, right? Now, for me, I love Tesla, so I would just go with the Tesla. You're getting away from gas and it self-drives and all of that. But yeah, for a monitor, you're many times flying to different parts of the country or globally if you're on a global trial. So the car, not so much important.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Yeah. A lot of them don't work locally. Like with your academics side of experience, I'm sure it might all be local, right? Local offices and everything like that. But yeah, with monitoring at a sponsor, you're flying. You're living in the airports. You're living in hotels. Sometimes they'll use you. Let's say like 75% travel and 25% in the office. So it just depends. Every company, like I said, is a little bit different. But if you want to travel a lot, then that would be for you. If you don't want to travel that much, then like for a company that utilizes travel a little bit less, Like they might use it 25% of the time or maybe 50% of the time. And that's for monitoring. For myself, like as an in-house CRA, I travel maybe about once or twice a month around there. So it's not too much travel.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah, but again, that's not too much travel, right? Versus a monitor. If I was 100% monitor, I would be traveling, like I said, for this company that I'm working with, at least right now, it would be like 70-80% of the time.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's you've got a good deal there.
Yeah. It's a fun job. I do like it. I have a great team, a great manager, and I've been in this industry for a long time, and sometimes it's hard for me to find people I can learn from. And from this team, I've been able to learn a lot. So I'm very grateful for that.
And also, where are the best ways to brush up on the regulations, FDA and GCP? What are good resources that I can use to gain more knowledge?
Yeah, so those are updated pretty frequently. So I would just go on Google and just Google the Code of Federal Regulations. It's essentially like 21 CFR part whatever, right? There's all kinds of different parts there.
Yeah.
I would just Google those and read through them. It's not so important to know those by heart. What's more important is to know how to find them. So if you become familiar with searching for the elements of informed consent, CFR 812, for instance, you just know kind of what those generally say and kind of where to find certain answers. That's really the most helpful part. You don't necessarily have to memorize them.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, and there's little booklets too that I have and that a lot of sponsors have. It's just a CFR booklet, and it's good as a quick reference in case you need to look something up. It doesn't happen too often where you need to be looking up CFRs, but there have been many instances where I've needed to, or where my team has needed to, and it's because maybe a tricky question might come up from a site, or a tricky scenario, and you need to make sure that you're within regulations, and you would look those up to make sure that you're instructing the site to do the right thing, or that you're, as a sponsor, taking the appropriate actions within regulations. But yeah, I would just Google those. And just become familiar with what they generally say, but you don't worry about memorizing them. No one's going to quiz you on that kind of thing. But it would be good to know, because let's say in conversation they're talking about like electronic signatures, but rather than saying that, they say like 21 CFR Part 11. You'd have to know that that's what they're talking about. Right, so because like with 21 CFR Part 11, that's where like the electronic signatures come into play, and something has to be compliant with that regulation to be a electronic signature in clinical research.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start looking at them a lot more and just get more familiar with what's in them.
Yeah, just be familiar with what they generally say. Like I said, don't worry about reading everything, but just kind of be like, okay, this is talking about the PI responsibilities. This is talking about the sponsor responsibilities. This is talking about the IRB responsibilities. This is what defines, a protocol violation, for instance, things like that, right? So you can look those things up and just be familiar where to find answers, and that's what would make a good project manager, because they're able to know how you utilize their resources to come up with a proper response to something.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, not a problem. I'm happy to help. If you have questions in the future, feel free to reach out to me again. I'd be happy to, have another call with you if you're have another interview coming up. But be sure to let me know how this current, or you have 2 interviews, right? So let me know how they go and if you get the job.
Yeah, thanks so much. Your social media and clinical research stuff is really, really helpful.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. I found that there wasn't much information out there, and when I was when I was applying for these jobs, I started off in research right out of college, but I never worked on the sponsor side. So when I was trying to get into the sponsor side, it was very difficult for me because, like I said, you have to kind of learn the lingo. You have to know what they want to hear, what they don't want to hear. And it was hard for me to kind of put my experience in context of of what a sponsor wants. And that wasn't listed anywhere, right? So that's really where this channel was inspired from, was to kind of fill that gap of knowledge. And if you're interested as well, I'm going to be hosting live question and answers on Patreon. So if you want to take a look at that it helps support the channel, but it's a good way for me to, I think, give back to my audience. So I would be happy to answer weekly, any questions that you guys have. If you want to enroll through that. But also, if you want to do another coaching call like we're doing today, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to set that up with you.
Yeah, that all sounds great. The Patreon Q&A, definitely. And what was I going to say? Yeah, it really is helping fill the gap, because it's kind of as if the clinical research world, there's kind of gatekeepers to it.
Yeah.
But once you know what they're looking for, then I think it's the same things that they're always looking for, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, exactly. You just have to know what to say and what types of questions they're going to be asking, what they're looking for. If you watched my series on how to become a CRA, I essentially go over that entire thing. So that would be a good resource for you. It talks about speaking with recruiters, doing the answering the interview questions, the different types of questions, developing your resume. Your resume looks good. I wouldn't really change too much. Just make sure that you are being concise in your answers, but start each sentence off in your resume with a strong verb that shows some sort of action or authority or just ownership of something, because that's a good way to start off a sentence on resumes. And then you can make sure that you say, through this action, this result happened. And that's essentially how you want to structure your resume, is showing an action and a result for each of those line items.
Okay, I think I should update that definitely to make it a lot stronger.
Right. But yeah, your resume is strong as it is. But yeah, that would be my only critique would be just to look through your sentences and see if you can kind of change it up a little bit in that regard. That's just helpful for sponsor or a hiring manager to kind of understand what it is that you did and what that led to. What was the results of your work. And it just shows a deeper understanding and a better sophistication on your end of how to present yourself, right, for the industry.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. I'll take that on board.
Yeah.
We'll probably try and do some updates now. Thanks so much, Eric.
Yeah, I'm happy to help. So again, keep me updated, and talk to you soon, okay?
Thanks. Have a great weekend.
All right, you too. Take care. Bye. All right, so that's it for today's call. If you want to be on a coaching call, be sure to reach out to me. You can direct message me on my Instagram. Link is down below in the description. Also, if you want to support the channel, there's Amazon affiliate links down below. If you purchase anything through there, it doesn't have to be those exact products. It does help the channel. But those products are what I use to make these videos. So if you're interested in buying those products, do check it out. And then also you can support the channel through Patreon. I'm going to be hosting live Q&As on there weekly to answer any questions that you guys have. And that's for career coaching or even consulting if you're a business owner for a clinical research site. So be sure to check that out. Link is down below in the description as well. And that's only $5 a month, and you get essentially just one-on-ones with me weekly with that. So anyways, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell button so you're notified of my future videos, and I'll talk to you guys next time.